Okay, the title of this video might be Social Distancing Has Devastating Effects, Increasing the Likelihood of Suicide as given by Emil Durkheim. Now, Durkheim was a sociologist that lived in France from the mid-1800s up through the end of the 19th century and slightly on into the 1900s. But his book that he wrote in 1897 about suicide is a classic. In fact, every single sociology book, when they discuss suicide, there is one individual that they all quote and they all look up to, and it's Durkheim. So what I'm going to try to do is to show you the thesis that by social distancing ourselves from our friends, our neighbors, our family, our church, our social group, our club, our volunteer work, you name it, by social distancing, we are removing what is called social integration. Now, what that means is the less contact you have with people, the higher the possibility of suicide. So we're going to take a little look at this in a brief sort of manner. I'll let you take a look there at Durkheim, the French sociologist who is credited with being one of the founders of the branch that we know as sociology in the social sciences. So what Durkheim did in his study on suicide, which came out about 1897, Durkheim was looking for places where there was a high incidence of suicide per capita. In other words, not necessarily the highest number of suicide, but the greatest number of suicides per population. So what he did was he looked to the Scandinavian countries, and he noticed they had an enormous high per capita of suicide. And he was perplexed. Why would that be? And he kept searching and searching and searching for answers. And then he finally realized something, that most of the homes and the residents were so far apart that the people really had very little contact with one another. And there was great sense of isolation. What do you think this social distancing is doing? What do you think this quarantine is doing? What do you think this stay at home is doing? Is producing one thing: isolation. Now that was the one thing that Durkheim got hold of and said, wait a minute, what does it mean that people are so isolated? And if they're so isolated, then they're committing suicide at a high rate per capita. What was going on? So basically, Durkheim would then come up with the idea of what he called social integration. Now, what that means in sort of regular language is, I think, what it means is that you have a group of friends that you go out with or you hang out with, and then take them away. You have a certain club that you go to once a month, take that away. You maybe volunteer somewhere at the Animal Rescue League, take that away. You go to church service once a week, take that away. You go to school whether you're in high school or college, take that away. Now just sit at home all day long by yourself. Okay? Let's take the Scandinavian countries in the time of Durkheim. You're in a little house and your nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. You don't have a car. You don't have an airplane or anything. It's the 1800s. Life is simple. In other words, you're on your own. You're completely on your own. Because the nearest house is far away. You're isolated. Hence, if you're isolated, you're not in a high level of social integration. You're not having contact with different people in different groups. Therefore, you're alone, and maybe then you begin to start thinking a lot of negative thoughts, and then those negative thoughts turn to the whole idea and the possibility of that individual wanting to take his or her life. So Durkheim basically showed us that suicide has social origins. It's not completely biological. Now, there are those that will try to point to the biological roots too, such as deficiencies in brain or certain chemicals and things like that. That's not to deny that at all. But the major importance of Durkheim was that there is a social component of suicide. And there is no sociologist that will take Durkheim on and refute him. Almost every single sociology textbook will have Durkheim featured on the topic of suicide. Of course, now they'll also include other ideas and possibilities. But the major contribution of Durkheim was, and I'll sort of put it like in modern terms, people need people. And there was a song about that years ago, you know, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. You may not necessarily agree. You may be a little more of an introvert than an extrovert. But people who are extroverts are being told, shut your door and shut your mouth. When you go to a store, you're told, stay on the lines. Don't get any closer than 6 feet. And everybody around you is like a miniature drill sergeant in a boot camp. Everyone around you is like the warden in a prison yard. They're constantly reminding you of all these stupid rules. And so you want to submit to be good little citizen. You don't want to endanger anybody because you might have a very deadly virus. So you isolate. You go into your home and you hibernate. Now we're recreating something of what life was like in Scandinavian countries that produced the high level of suicide per capita. So my thesis or my statement is this: social distancing, quarantining, staying at home, all these things because there's a deadly virus that's going to take all of us away, is a form of torture and torment that is causing people to get cut off from their loved ones and their friends and family. And then it might cause them to have a lot of negative thoughts and a lot of negative feelings, which then could lead to an increase of suicide. Now, these statements are pretty much in my words, but what I want to say is, if Emil Durkheim was able to speak to our land right now, and we were able to say, could you please, Mr. Durkheim, Professor Durkheim, could you please come out of the grave for just a little bit here? Could you please come out of your grave? And could you please speak to our land? Durkheim would say, do not isolate yourself. Do not shut yourself in your room. Do not barricade yourself in your house, because if you do, you could be increasing the possibility that you would want to do harm to yourself. So you're not going to hear this now on the news, the so-called news, because they don't really care about you. In fact, they're your enemies, but most people don't believe that. They're suckered, and they think, oh, the news people care about me. Huh. They want to bring death and destruction. They want to bring totalitarianism. They're not concerned about your health. They're not concerned about people catching a virus. They are trying to bring in a new world order, even if you don't believe in the new world order. So please, if you're listening to my video, feel free to look up Durkheim for yourself, and in particular, look up his study on suicide. And you might get the hang of it if you read it yourself. But the general idea is, do not cut yourself off. So a suggestion, find ways to be with people. Don't sit at home and isolate yourself. Don't barricade yourself in your home. Especially if you've had some struggles in life with anxiety or depression. Now that's a whole nother topic of discussion. People that are leaning in the direction of having anxiety, even before all this, their anxiety levels are going to go way up. And I've seen that already in a few people. But mostly now, my concern for you, my listener, and you, the one watching this, is to please listen to Durkheim. He's the one talking right now, if you understand his study. Okay? He's the one talking, not me. He's trying to tell you by his life efforts and his work, the best he could to study society, that we need social integration. We do not need isolation. In fact, if you think about it, if you run a prison and you have a prisoner that is terrible and can't be controlled, what do you do with him or her? You take them and you put them in isolation. Because isolation is a form of torment and torture. Oh, I know. Practice social distancing. Oh, I know. You're not allowed out of the house because of the order of the governor. Well, you better think about your mental health. You better think about the mental health of your family. You better think about the mental health of your neighbor. Speak to people. Do what you can to have contact with some people. Because Durkheim is telling you social integration is what we need. and those who don't have a level of social integration, and they're not connected with a group, they're not connected with a family, they're not connected with a neighbor, they have the highest rates of suicide. So I hope you've enjoyed this, but I really want you to take it as kind of a warning, and I want you to take it as something that you can be doing, because maybe that person near you, whoever they are, maybe they need you to say hello to them. Maybe they need you to speak to them. And maybe some people don't want to, but you just might come across a few people who will be mighty glad to have a conversation with you and to feel that somehow they connected with you and they didn't remain in isolation. So, my advice, don't social distance yourself. Socially integrate with others, because that will preserve your mental health and the mental health of your neighbors, family, and friends, and all of society. Thank you for listening to me go on. This is the end of the video.